Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the world of music.
Okay.
Specifically how it can express, national identity.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got two composers that we're going to be looking at, Antonín Dvořák and Edvard Grieg.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how these two composers from totally different corners of Europe managed to capture the sounds of their homelands.
Right.
In their music. We're not just talking about pretty tunes here.
Right.
Their work really became a powerful statement about cultural identity, especially during the 19th century.
Yeah.
A time of, really intense nationalistic feelings across the continent.
I was just thinking about that. Our source material for this deep dive is a fascinating episode called The Nationalistic Sounds of Dvořák and Grieg from the show Classical Crescendo.
Right.
And it really does paint a vivid picture of that era, the Romantic period.
Yeah.
It was all about heightened emotions, individualism, and this surge of national consciousness. Mm-hmm. So how did all of that translate into music?
Well, imagine you're part of a region that's trying to assert its own unique identity.
Okay.
Maybe even pushing back against a larger, more dominant empire.
Okay.
Composers like Dvořák and Grieg really became cultural champions, weaving the sounds of their homelands, the folk melodies, the rhythms, even the dances into their compositions.
Right.
It was a way of saying, hey, we have a unique culture and it's worth celebrating.
So they weren't just composing.
Right.
They were practically cultural revolutionaries.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's fascinating is that both Dvořák and Grieg came from musical families.
Mm-hmm.
Dvořák, born in Bohemia, which is now part of the Czech Republic, grew up surrounded by folk music.
Right.
His dad even played the zither.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah, and that wasn't just a quaint family tradition, was it?
Right.
You have to remember that Bohemia was under Austrian rule at the time.
Right.
And there's this powerful movement to revive Czech culture. Dvořák's music became a powerful voice for that movement, giving a soundtrack to this cultural resurgence.
That's so interesting. So we've got this composer who's deeply passionate about his cultural heritage.
Right.
But did he literally just take, existing folk songs and plop them into his symphonies?
Not quite.
All
The
right.
deep dive explains that Dvořák very rarely directly quoted folk tunes.
Well,
Instead, he absorbed their essence, like the scales, the rhythms, the overall feel,
right.
and then wove those elements into his own original compositions.
Oh,
It's like he distilled the spirit of Bohemian folk music and then created something entirely new yet deeply rooted in tradition.
so it's less about copying and pasting
Right.
and more about capturing the soul of the music and making it his own.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, his Slavonic dances are a perfect example of that, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're so vibrant and full of energy.
Absolutely. The Slavonic dances, originally for piano but later orchestrated, are a prime example of how Dvořák blended folk elements with his own creative genius.
Yeah.
They're full of life, energy, and that unmistakable bohemian flavor.
And what I find so captivating is that Dvořák didn't just stay in Bohemia.
Yeah.
He actually journeyed to America in 1892
Wow.
to direct the National Conservatory of Music in New York City.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Right.
Dvořák was so inspired by the potential he saw in American music that he encouraged American composers to find their own national voice,
Wow.
just as he had done with Czech music.
Wow, so he was paying it forward.
Exactly. He was like, look to your folk traditions, to your own unique sounds, and create something distinctly American.
That's incredible. It's like he was inspiring a whole new generation of composers to embrace their own cultural heritage.
Mm-hmm.
This, of course, led to his iconic From the New World Symphony, which beautifully blends American and Bohemian elements.
It's a fascinating example of how musical nationalism can transcend borders and inspire new creative possibilities. It's about taking inspiration from your own roots and then making it your own.
Now, let's shift our focus to Edvard Grieg.
Okay.
Born in Norway in 1843.
All right.
He shared Dvořák's passion for incorporating folk music into his compositions.
Mm-hmm.
And like Dvořák, he also came from a musical family. His mother was his first piano teacher.
That's right. And Grieg, just like Dvořák, was part of a movement to establish a distinct national identity.
Okay.
For Grieg, it was about asserting a unique Norwegian identity, separate from the Danish and German influences that were quite dominant at the time.
So his music became a way of expressing this newfound sense of national pride, of showcasing the beauty and uniqueness of Norwegian folk traditions.
Precisely. Grieg's music became a symbol of this cultural awakening, this assertion of Norwegian Norwegian identity on the world stage.
Now, here's something I found fascinating in our deep dive.
Okay.
Grieg didn't just listen to folk music. He went above and beyond.
Okay.
He actually traveled all over rural Norway, collecting folk tunes firsthand.
Wow, he was dedicated to preserving these melodies and bringing them to a wider audience.
Yeah.
And he did this in a really interesting way.
Okay.
He would often harmonize and arrange these folk melodies, essentially translating them into the language of classical music.
So he kind of gave these folk tunes a classical makeover.
Exactly. It's like he was building a bridge between the world of traditional folk music and the world of classical composition.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And you can hear this in many of his works, from his lyric pieces for piano to his Holberg suite, which blends Baroque dance forms with that distinct Norwegian character.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget some of his most iconic pieces, like the Piano Concerto in A minor with its soaring melodies, and the pure Gynt suites with instantly recognizable pieces like Morning Mood and In the Hall of the Mountain King.
Oh, yeah.
They perfectly capture those sweeping Norwegian landscapes and the spirit of folklore, don't they?
They do. Those pieces are fantastic examples of how Grieg took those raw materials of folk music, the melodies, the rhythms, and transformed them into something truly captivating and unique.
So here we have these two incredible composers, both deeply connected to their cultural roots,
Right.
and both masters at weaving folk elements into their work. It makes you wonder, what are some of the key similarities and differences in their approaches?
Yeah.
How did they shape the sound of musical nationalism?
That's a great question. And I think it's one we should explore further.
Yeah.
What stands out to you so far? What similarities or differences have you noticed between Dvořák and Grieg?
Well, they both seem to share this deep respect for their folk traditions, but they also weren't afraid to experiment and create something new.
Right.
It's like they found this perfect balance between honoring their heritage and pushing musical boundaries.
You've hit the nail on the head. That's one of the most fascinating aspects of their work.
Yeah.
They both embraced, folk rhythms and scales, drew inspiration from folk melodies, and championed their national identities through their music.
What strikes me is that their music is so accessible.
Right.
It speaks to people's hearts, regardless of their background, or whether they're like classical music aficionados. I mean, I get chills every time I hear Dvořák's New World Symphony.
Yeah.
And I'm sure many people feel the same way about Grieg's Piano Concerto.
Absolutely. Their music has this universal appeal, this ability to transcend cultural boundaries and connect with people on an emotional level.
Right.
And I think that's a testament to their genius.
Yeah.
They managed to create something both deeply personal and universally resonant.
But even with all these similarities, they were distinct individuals working in different contexts, weren't they?
Right.
What are some of the key differences in their styles and how they approached incorporating folk elements?
One of the most noticeable differences is in their musical styles.
Okay.
Dvořák often worked on a grander, more symphonic scale, while Grieg leaned towards more intimate pieces, especially for piano and voice.
Right.
Think of Dvořák's sweeping symphonies and Grieg's evocative piano miniatures.
That makes sense. It's like their music reflects not only their personal styles, but also the landscapes and cultural atmospheres of their homelands.
Yeah.
Dvořák's Bohemia, part of a vast empire.
Right.
And Grieg's Norway, striving for independence, had very distinct vibes.
Exactly. Their music is a reflection of their personal journeys and the political and social realities of their times.
Right.
And their approaches to incorporating folk elements also differed.
Okay.
Dvořák, while deeply influenced by Bohemian folk music, rarely directly quoted folk tunes.
Right.
He would distill their essence, capture the spirit, and then weave it into his own compositions.
Whereas Grieg often took a more direct approach, actually collecting and arranging existing folk melodies. I wonder if that difference in approach is also reflective of their cultural contexts.
That's an interesting observation. Dvořák, working within a large empire, might have felt the need to assert a distinct Czech identity in a more subtle, nuanced way.
Okay.
Whereas Grieg, in a country fighting for its independence, might have seen the preservation and celebration of existing folk tunes as a more direct act of cultural defiance.
That makes a lot of sense. And if we zoom out to the bigger picture, it's clear that this movement towards musical nationalism had a huge impact on classical music in the 19th century, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It wasn't just about Dvořák and Grieg.
Right.
This wave of nationalistic fervor swept across Europe, inspiring composers to explore their own cultural roots and create music that reflected the spirit of their homelands.
Like the Mighty Five in Russia, composers like Mussorgsky and Rimsky-Korsakov, who created this distinctly Russian sound,
right,
drawing inspiration from folk tales, history, and the vast landscapes of their country.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were other Czech composers besides Dvořák.
Yeah.
Like Smetana, whose music celebrated Czech history and landscapes.
And let's not forget the Scandinavian composers like Carl Nielsen and Jean Sibelius,
right,
both of whom drew on their own Nordic heritage to create powerful and evocative music.
Yeah.
It's as if a whole tapestry of musical voices was emerging,
right,
each thread representing a unique cultural identity.
It's amazing how this movement encouraged composers all across Europe to embrace their cultural heritage.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just about creating art for art's sake, was it?
Right.
These composers were actively preserving folk traditions that might have been lost otherwise.
They were, in a sense, acting as musical archaeologists,
right,
unearthing these hidden treasures and giving them new life.
Yeah.
Think of it this way. They took these melodies and rhythms that had been passed down orally for generations and gave them a written form, ensuring that they wouldn't be forgotten.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
So they were not only creating art, they were preserving cultural memory.
Right.
And this influence didn't stop in the 19th century, did it?
No, not at all.
Composers like Bartók and Vaughan Williams in the 20th century continued to explore folk traditions and integrate them into their work.
Exactly. The impact of this movement resonated far beyond the 19th century, influencing generations of composers to come.
Right.
It's clear that Dvořák and Grieg, through their passion and innovation, played a crucial role in shaping the course of musical history.
It's incredible how these two composers from different countries and different backgrounds managed to create music that continues to resonate with us today.
Mm-hmm.
And while their music is deeply rooted in their cultural heritage,
right,
it also speaks to something universal, something that transcends borders and connects us all.
You know, it's interesting to think about all the different ways we experience their music today.
Yeah.
We hear it in concert halls, of course, but also in movies, commercials, even video games.
It's like their music has become woven into the fabric of our lives.
It has.
But let's dive into some specific pieces that showcase their brilliance.
Okay.
Our deep dive from Classical Crescendo had some fantastic recommendations. For anyone wanting to experience the energy and rhythms of those Bohemian folk dances we talked about, the Slavonic dances, both Opus 46 and Opus 72, are a must-listen, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. They're a perfect introduction to Dvořák's vibrant and captivating world.
And for a taste of how he blended American influences with his own Bohemian style, I highly recommend his String Quartet No. 12 in F major, nicknamed The American.
Oh, yeah.
I've always loved that nickname. It was composed during his time in the U.S.
Right.
So it's like a musical postcard capturing his impressions of a new land and culture.
Yeah.
And, of course, we can't forget his cello concerto in B minor.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's such a powerful and emotive work that showcases Dvořák's gift for melody.
Yeah.
And his ability to create music that speaks directly to the heart.
It's one of those pieces that just stays with you long after you've heard it.
Yeah.
The cello's voice is so rich and expressive.
Right.
And the way Dvořák weaves in those Bohemian-inspired melodies is simply breathtaking.
Now, for Grieg, the deep dive suggests starting with his lyric pieces for piano.
Oh, yeah.
They're these short, intimate pieces that are perfect for getting a taste of those evocative Norwegian folk elements we discussed.
They're like little musical snapshots, each one capturing a mood, a feeling, a fleeting moment in time.
Yeah.
And they're full of those subtle nods to Norwegian folk music that make Grieg's music so distinctive.
And for a completely different flavor, Grieg's Holberg Suite is a great choice.
Oh, it's fun.
It showcases how he took those elegant Baroque dance forms
Right.
and infused them with that unmistakable Norwegian character.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's a really fun and unexpected listen.
It's delightful. It's like stepping back in time, but with a distinctly Nordic twist.
And for anyone who wants to experience how Grieg brought together music and poetry, his songs, specifically Opus 33, are worth exploring.
I was just going to mention those. They're settings of Norwegian poetry, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
It shows how this idea of national identity wasn't just about music. It was influencing all forms of art.
It's a reminder that music doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's intertwined with literature, with history, with the political and social currents of its time.
Right.
And Grieg's songs are a beautiful example of how he used his music to amplify the voices of Norwegian poets.
Yeah.
To bring their words to life through melody and harmony.
Beautiful.
So what does all of this mean for us today as listeners in the 21st century?
Yeah.
Why should we care about these composers and this movement from over a century ago? What can we learn from their passion for their heritage and their willingness to experiment and innovate?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think Dvořák and Grieg offer so much more than just beautiful music.
Oh, right.
They remind us of the power of music to connect us to our own cultural heritage.
Right.
To tell stories and to express the soul of a people. Their music invites us to explore the rich tapestry of musical traditions that exist in the world.
Right.
And to appreciate the beauty of diversity.
And they showed us how folk traditions can enrich classical music.
Yeah.
Creating something new and vibrant without losing sight of those roots. They weren't afraid to experiment, to blend the familiar with the unexpected.
Right.
And in doing so, they created music that feels both timeless and deeply relevant to our lives today.
And think about this. Their success encouraged countless other composers to explore their own cultural backgrounds. It's like they opened a door and said, come on in, let's celebrate the richness and diversity of our musical heritages.
Yeah.
And because of that, classical music became more inclusive, more representative of the world we live in.
Right.
That's a legacy worth cherishing.
It really is. And as we wrap up our deep dive, I'm left with this sense of awe.
Yeah.
Dvořák and Grieg, these two composers who are separated by time and geography, managed to create music that still speaks to us today.
It's incredible.
It makes you wonder how they did it. What was it about their music that captured the spirit of their times and continues to resonate with listeners across generations?
I think it's their ability to tap into something universal.
Yeah.
Something that transcends cultural boundaries.
Right.
Their music speaks to our shared human experience. The joys and sorrows, the longing for belonging, the celebration of our heritage. They remind us that music is a powerful force that can connect us to something larger than ourselves.
And that brings us to our final thought-provoking question for you.
Okay.
If you were to create a piece of music that captured the essence of your own cultural background, what would it sound like? What instruments would you use?
What rhythms and melodies would you incorporate?
Right.
What stories would your music tell?
Yeah.
Would it be a grand symphony or an intimate piano piece, a soaring vocal melody, or a driving dance rhythm?
It's an exciting challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
To think about how we can express our own cultural identities through music, how we can draw inspiration from our heritage.
Right.
And create something new and unique.
And who knows? Maybe you'll discover a hidden talent or a passion for music that you never knew you had.
That's right.
I encourage you to explore the works of Dvořák and Grieg.
Yeah.
You might be surprised by how much of their music you already recognize from movies or other media.
Right.
And as you listen, think about the power of music to express identity, to tell stories, and to connect us all.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope you've enjoyed diving deep into the world of musical nationalism with us.
Yes, thank you for listening.
Until next time, keep those ears open and those minds curious.